Thank you for having me here. It's quite exciting to learn a bit more of the publication side. As Fiona said, I'm a research scientist and I'm a real geologist and coming from the sciences who started to do data management for many years, and the contact to the publishing industry and the publication process has only happened in the last 2 years. And I hope I will be able to show you a bit of the issues that we have tried to address in the data center that we're running. AIDA, as Fiona said, is a data center that deals with solid earth data. And it didn't start really as a repository. It started developing databases that were really useful to scientists to explore very specific topics. And it evolved into something that is now trying to basically provide the services that Simon was already laying out. And so you'll see a lot of issues coming up again that Simon mentioned before. So when we're talking about access to data these days, the main reasons, and I mean, Simon showed a long list, but I think the two primary reasons for really pushing open access to data is that we need verification of research results, and we need to make the data accessible for reuse. And this is specifically important in our digital age, where we have ways to mine the data, to really work with the data in big volumes and so on. So the issue then becomes, how do we make data fit for reuse? Can they always be easily reused? And so first of all, clearly, in order to reuse data, they must be discoverable, which means they need sort of a basic description of the data sets, and they need to be persistently and uniquely identifiable. They also need to be openly accessible. That means no copyright restriction or patents and other mechanisms. And the data must be safe. It shouldn't go away. There have to be procedures to ensure that they don't get corrupted or lost in the long term. But the most important to me is data must be useful. And these are actually 4 points that Mark Parsons, who Simon also referred to, has outlined. So what makes data useful? And I want to show you 2 examples from the sciences where data has been incredibly useful. Some of you may have heard about the Sloan Digital Sky Survey as one of the most successful projects in establishing a huge database of astronomical data. I think there are 930,000 galaxies are in this survey. And it has led to an incredible amount of science. It's cited in more than 2,000 articles by now, and this is, I think those statistics are already outdated probably. And a lot of science has come out that nobody predicted really. So that I consider useful. The second example is from my projects, is a compilation of geochemical data for rocks from all over the oceans. And this is a map that shows you data that was compiled from over 300 publications through the database just within a few minutes. And all of the data points are scaled to a specific chemical parameter, which is a strontium isotope ratio that gives you information about the composition of the underlying earth mantle. And so, within 2 minutes, you can actually explore the whole literature and create a map that shows you there's a difference in composition in the Indian Ocean mantle as compared to the Pacific mantle. So what makes data useful, really? And I think these 2 examples show it's the integration. It's the integration within the discipline. But then, these compilations make data accessible also across disciplines, and they make them accessible to tools and models because they are homogenized and harmonized and so on. And this helps us really build this distributed knowledge system and data system that will enable data-driven and data-intensive science. The other aspect of data that makes them useful is clearly the quality of the data. And I did, a few years ago, a little survey in my institution asking researchers, how do you evaluate data quality? What makes data quality important for you? And these are two statements that basically lead us to, well, that was another statement they did. It's just knowing I can trust the numbers. That's what quality is. And that means if you want to trust the numbers, you have to give sufficient information for people to evaluate, for investigators to evaluate the data. And Simon actually mentioned that as well. You need the documentation of provenance. You need to understand what was measured, how it was measured, what the uncertainties were, what computations were applied on top of it. And that needs to follow certain community guidelines. And this is where my point is about disciplinary or domain-specific repositories, that a very general library or an institutional repository doesn't have the knowledge in every discipline to establish these guidelines or to even evaluate if the metadata are complete. This is something that needs to come from the domain sciences. So what I consider domain-specific data stewardship is really the development and maintenance and constant promotion, engagement with the community for domain-specific standards for data and metadata, developing guidelines and the tools for the investigator that it's easy for them to comply with these standards that were developed and facilitate the data submission to the repositories. Then harmonizing the data, integrating them, and making them available for tools or for in machine-readable format for other systems to take advantage of them. So I think that domain-specific repositories, something like Dryad that Simon mentioned, or EarthChem that we're running for geochemical data, or IRIS is a big data center for seismic data, these centers are best poised to ensure the fitness for reuse through the domain-specific data stewardship. But these repositories also must ensure professional data curation services such as long-term archiving, persistent identification, discoverability, and they must integrate with the scholarly communication ecosystem as Fiona described it. And I think that many domain-specific systems at the moment do not yet fulfill these criteria. This is the data center that I'm heading, a community-based facility, and I wanted to show you in the example of AIDA what we have done or how you can move forward to actually become a repository that can provide these services. So we run a lot of data collection, software tools, and so on. And this, as I mentioned before, has been the origin of our data center, not the data publication process. So we had a big a user community already. But then we've also developed these standards to make the systems more useful, to have that data reuse fitness. So one thing we did was establish an editors roundtable, and just 2 weeks ago we had another meeting of this editors roundtable at the biggest geochemical conference that we hold. And this editors roundtable a few years ago actually developed a policy statement on the requirements for the reporting of geochemical data that's really based in the understanding of geochemical data. We have developed a data exchange protocol, cruise metadata in the marine geoscience data system, or a system for unique naming of samples that are used in publications, so you can unambiguously cite samples. The steps that we had to take to move from just a suite of databases, basically, to become a repository was better sustainability. It's not perfect yet, but we are now a cooperative agreement with the National Science Foundation, so we are a facility rather than just a project. And we have a formal community governance with a policy committee and a user committee. We have changed a lot of the policies and procedures for our systems with data submission, with persistent identification. We've established agreements with the National Geophysical Data Center and Columbia University Libraries for long-term archiving. And we're working very closely with a number of publishers to provide cross-referencing and integration of our metadata into the data citation index from Thomson Reuters and so on. We tried to get some status of certification by becoming a member in the World Data System, and we are a publication agent within the DataCite Consortium. The process that we favor is that investigators submit data to us that get deposited in the IAIDA repository, gets a DOI, while at the same time they submit a manuscript to a journal. They can cite the data by DOI and also integrate the DOI of the publication in the metadata profile of the data set. And then our data managers actually integrate the data further into the syntheses or make them accessible through other portals. We have a thorough review of the metadata and the data. Our curators and data managers work very closely with investigators, helping them to do it all right, to register their samples, have locations of samples in the data sets, and so on. We continue to work with the broad community on further development of metadata schemas, vocabularies, to ensure that data can be integrated, and clearly also checking that files are still readable and so on. Just an example here of a metadata profile from a data set, and you see it has a DOI, and it points to the primary publication also through a DOI. Another service that we provide is to relate the data sets to the funding awards, so it's possible to actually generate data compliance reports from the system that show you if you enter an award number, you see all the data sets that we hold for that award number. Here is an example of the linking with Elsevier that we've established. So in this article of the future, you can click on a little banner there that has already queried our system and shows that 32 samples are available in our system with data for this article. We're working, and this is where you get, when you click on that banner, you get directly into our data system and to the data. And in the future, we want to extend that with more visual representation of the data themselves, like maps that show the data, or even plots of chemical compositions. Whoops. Okay, so to summarize, I think that the domain-specific repositories are really central to the process of data publication. They will ensure that the data is available outside the publication process, that they can be integrated, that they thoroughly reviewed, and so on. But it requires a lot of collaborations that we need to do. We can't do it all. We need computer scientists, because we aren't the computer scientists to build the right type of tools, the right type of interoperability. We need agreements with other places that are better suited for long-term archiving and so on. And we need to, the most important, to integrate with the publishers, but also with systems that provide bibliometrics. I had a few questions added, and maybe that can trigger some discussion. I mean, clearly, many data types have no home yet. We're lucky we have a geochemical data system, but I know structural geology for our field does not have a repository. So where should those data go? How can we help those domains to establish repositories that can provide the same services? Who decides which repository data should be submitted to? There are multiple places where geochemical data could go. So is that up to the investigator? Is it up to the journal? Is it up to a society to make recommendations there? The sustainability of repositories is clearly not solved, and I liked Simon's new approach that he showed for Dryad in starting to charge, so we need business models for that. But we also need a process to streamline the linking between repositories and journals, because the journals get confused who they should be working with, and they can't just continue to add on yet more journals to work with. So do we need some sort of centralized solution, which is also important for bibliometrics. So I think I'm going to stop with that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kerstin.